Hey guys, tonight we walk into a city that is still trembling, at least in memory, and we follow a rumor down beneath the cracked streets of San Francisco, where a hidden train station may once have waited in the dark after the 1906 quake. Some parts of this story are widely accepted history, like the earthquake, the fires, the broken brick, the sudden rebuilding of an American city that had no time to catch its breath. Some parts are interpretation, because old maps, damaged records, and scattered memories can suggest more than they can fully explain. And some parts are calm what-if imagination, the kind that lets us stand at the edge of a sealed stairwell and wonder what might be below. You probably won't survive this night in 1906 without ruining your shoes, your lungs, and possibly your dignity, but we'll keep things gentle. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin on Market Street before sunrise, though the word street feels generous tonight. The ground beneath you has buckled in places, as if the earth has taken a breath too sharply and forgotten how to settle back down. Rails bend through dust and broken stone. Brick walls lean with the tired posture of old men. Telegraph wires hang low over the avenue like black threads from a torn coat. Somewhere a horse coughs. Somewhere else a window frame creaks in a building that seems to be deciding whether to keep standing or simply retire from architecture altogether. Most historians agree that the earthquake of April 18, 1906 and the fires that followed changed San Francisco's physical shape and civic memory in ways that were enormous. The city did not merely lose buildings, it lost offices, archives, businesses, homes, station plans, private papers, engineering drawings, and the ordinary clutter that later generations depend on when they try to ask simple questions like, what exactly was here? The evidence we do have points to a city that was both devastated and impatient. San Francisco did not pause for a century of grief. It started clearing, rebuilding, arguing, borrowing money, laying tracks, rerouting traffic, and telling itself that tomorrow would be more solid than yesterday. But under your boots, something feels less settled. You stand beside a warped line of streetcar rail, and if you listen too carefully, which is always how trouble begins in a bedtime history story, you imagine a second sound beneath the first. Not the groan of surface metal, not the clatter of wagon wheels. Something lower. A hollow vibration, a soft iron hum beneath the pavement. That might be nothing, of course. To be clear, this is debated. Cities make strange sounds after disaster. Loose pipes knock, broken drains echo, rubble shifts. One cautious explanation could be that later rumors of a hidden station grew from ordinary underground infrastructure basements, utility corridors, cable car machinery, and forgotten service spaces. San Francisco was already a city of layers, practical layers, messy layers, expensive layers, because apparently building on hills beside a bay was not complicated enough. Still, the story pulls you onward. The idea is not that a shining secret subway, complete with polished tile and a mysterious conductor in a spotless uniform, lay perfectly preserved beneath 1906 San Francisco. That would be a lovely image and also a little too convenient. We're not proving anything tonight, we're following clues. The mystery isn't in what we know, but in what we can't confirm. A hidden train station in this safer telling might mean an abandoned platform, a planned transit chamber, a service-level structure, an unfinished rail access point, or even a remembered place later inflated by rumour. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. If the evidence is thin, we'll say so. We'll keep the solid ground separate from the mist. You step around a fallen cornice, careful not to trip over a piece of carved stone that once tried very hard to look European, San Francisco. Before the quake had been proud, noisy, crowded, ambitious, and more than a little theatrical. The city had cable cars climbing its hills, streetcars crossing busy corridors, ferry passengers pouring in and out near the waterfront, and business districts that believed growth was a moral virtue. It was a place where transportation mattered deeply because the landscape demanded it. Hills rose sharply. The bay cut routes apart. Fog slipped through streets as if it had a lease. Getting people across the city was not just convenience. It was survival, commerce, status, and daily irritation, all wearing the same hat. Historians still argue whether disasters reveal a city's true structure or simply scramble it beyond recognition. In San Francisco, both ideas may fit. The quake exposed foundations, ruptured mains, cracked pavements, and turned private interiors into public scenery. At the same time, the fires erased so much evidence that later stories could drift into the empty spaces. A lost record becomes a possibility, a remembered stairway becomes a rumor, a sealed basement becomes, with enough retelling, a station, and a station, because humans are humans, becomes a network. This is where the first fringe idea enters quietly, wearing soft shoes. A popular rumor claims that beneath parts of old San Francisco there were transit spaces more extensive than official memory usually allows, perhaps damaged, sealed, or deliberately ignored after the quake. This theory isn't widely accepted, but it survives because the city itself feels like it invites such thinking. There are hills full of cuttings, old cable systems, buried foundations, filled-in shoreline, forgotten vaults and corridors built for purposes that later generations may misunderstand. If we treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion, the rumor becomes less like a conspiracy and more like a question. What if the story is pointing at something else? You keep walking. Ash lifts under your shoes in soft grey puffs. The smell is wood smoke, wet plaster, hot metal, salt air, and that strange sour odour cities get when too many pipes stop doing their jobs at once. It is not a perfume anyone should bottle unless the brand name is Regret No. 5. You pass men carrying shovels, women pulling bundles, a boy dragging a chair with one missing leg, because even in catastrophe, people keep rescuing furniture that has absolutely no plan for the future. A policeman waves you away from an unstable wall. A cart rattles by with salvaged tools. Somewhere nearby, someone laughs too loudly, not because anything is funny, but because the alternative is sitting down in the road and becoming part of the rubble. Then you see it, or think you do. Near a break in the pavement, half hidden by boards and dust, there is a dark rectangular opening. Not grand, not cinematic in the obvious way, no glowing sign, no brass letters, just a descending space where a stair or service hatch might have been. Its edges are rough, its purpose is unclear. A careful reading might suggest nothing more mysterious than access to utilities, drainage, or the buried machinery of a city trying to modernize itself. But your tired mind, standing in 1906 with smoke above you and rails underfoot, imagines steps leading down to a low platform where nobody has waited for a train in years. That's a possibility, not a certainty. Below in your imagination, the air cools. The noise of Market Street dulls to a padded murmur. A tile has cracked. A sign has fallen face down. A rail disappears into brick shadow. Maybe this was never a public station. Maybe it was an unfinished ambition, a transit proposal paused by money politics, geology, or plain inconvenience. Maybe it was just a chamber that later storytellers dressed in railway clothes. But what if for one quiet minute the broken street above and the dark space below belonged to the same truth? San Francisco was always building one city on top of another, and the quake merely made the layers visible. You crouch near the opening and hear a faint drip. Dust settles on your sleeve. The rails behind you catch the first weak light of morning. The city is damaged, but it is not finished. Already men are talking about rebuilding. Already someone is measuring. Already someone is arguing about routes, property cost, access, progress. Because nothing says civic optimism like standing among ruins and immediately inventing a committee. And under all of it, real or remembered, planned or imagined, the hidden station waits as a puzzle. Not a hidden truth, not a confirmed network, a puzzle, a soft iron hum beneath history's floorboards. Smoke lowers over the city like a second ceiling, and you move through it slowly with your collar pulled up and your eyes watering in the soft grey light. The smell follows you everywhere now. Charred wood, damp brick, horse sweat, salt wind, burned paper. That last one matters more than it first seems. paper is fragile, almost embarrassingly fragile for something humans trust with property lines, engineering plans, business ledgers, city permits, transit proposals, and the quiet little notes that explain why a stairway was built in one place and not another. Paper likes to pretend it is civilization, then one spark arrives and civilization becomes ash in your sleeve. Most historians agree that the fires after the 1906 earthquake caused destruction on a scale even larger than the shaking itself. The earthquake broke gas lines, water mains failed, firefighting became brutally difficult, and whole blocks burned while people watched with the helpless patience of those who have already done everything they can do. What's broadly accepted is that many records vanished. City offices, private companies, architects, banks, hotels, rail concerns and property owners all lost documents. Some losses were official, some were personal. Some were probably never written down clearly in the first place, because bureaucracy has always had a secret talent for misplacing the one sheet everyone needs. You pass a clerk sitting on a crate sorting through a blackened metal box with the solemnity of a priest handling relics. He lifts a bundle of papers fused at the edges, the ink blurred into brown ghosts. A careful reading might suggest that stories of hidden infrastructure later grew stronger because so many ordinary explanations had burned away. If a tunnel entrance appeared on a plan but the plan vanished, future generations could only guess. If a platform was proposed, modified, abandoned, or folded into another project, the surviving trail might become thin enough for rumour to walk through it, wearing a nice coat and pretending to be evidence. Historians still argue whether the greatest damage to San Francisco's memory came from the quake itself, the fires that followed, or the hurried rebuilding that covered evidence faster than anyone could study it. That argument matters here because an erased station does not need a villain in a dark office stroking a cat and whispering "destroy the files." A more cautious explanation could be simpler and much more human disaster confusion, smoke missing ledgers, shifting priorities, and a city desperate to stand up again. Sometimes history is not hidden because someone locks it away. Sometimes it is hidden because everyone is too busy surviving breakfast. You continue towards the burned district where walls stand without roofs and chimneys rise like lonely punctuation marks. In some places, safes sit in the open air, their offices gone around them. Iron shutters twist. Street signs hang at wrong angles. A piano lies in the street with its keys exposed, looking offended, as though it expected better treatment from urban catastrophe. You step around a puddle, darkened by soot, and the little ash puffs from your shoes become a rhythm soft as a tired drum. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. If the evidence is thin, we'll say so. The documented part is the destruction of records and buildings. The interpretation is that missing paperwork may have helped later stories grow. The imagined part is the folder itself, perhaps labelled with a transit company name, perhaps tied with string, perhaps carried by a junior engineer who fully intended to file it on Monday, and then inconveniently history happened. What if that missing folder contained nothing dramatic at all? Just boring details about a proposed underground stop, a service connection, a cable power chamber, or a temporary access tunnel near Market Street. Boring details are exactly the kind that become thrilling after they disappear. You find yourself inside the shell of an office where the floor crunches underfoot. On one wall, a calendar still hangs curled by heat. On another, the shadow of a cabinet marks where drawers once held contracts and letters. The evidence we do have points to a city whose transportation systems were already complicated before the quake. Cable cars had machinery below the streets. Street railways needed power maintenance, storage, and rights of way. Waterfront movement depended on ferries and connecting lines. There were public routes, private ambitions, overlapping companies, and enough paperwork to make even a modern planning department quietly weep into its coffee. One interpretation is that the hidden train station legend may have absorbed many different underground realities into one neat image. A basement becomes a waiting room, a utility vault becomes a ticket hall, a cable machinery space becomes a platform, a proposed tunnel becomes a completed route. Let me rephrase that more carefully. Not because people were necessarily lying, but because memory loves shape. It takes fragments and tries to make a whole. It sees stairs going down and asks where they lead. It hears rails above and imagines rails below. It smells smoke and decides something must have been erased. A popular rumour claims that after the quake, certain damaged passages were deliberately sealed and left off later maps because they were unsafe, embarrassing, or inconvenient to explain. This theory isn't widely accepted, but it survives because it feels emotionally true in a city rebuilt under pressure. Officials and builders often do make practical decisions quickly after disaster. Dangerous voids get filled, temporary structures get buried, foundations are reused, streets are regraded, corners are straightened, and somewhere in all that practical work, the line between removed, forgotten and covered over can become blurry enough to nap in. You pause beside a pile of warped filing cabinets and imagine one drawer sliding open. Inside, not treasure, not a secret map glowing like a pirate movie, but dull city paper. A stamped permit, a route sketch, a note about grade changes, a complaint from a property owner who does not want vibration under his building, thank you very much. Honestly, if there is one reliable historical force, it is someone objecting to construction near their property. The mystery isn't in what we know, but in what we can't confirm. A missing record does not prove a missing station. It might support the idea that later confusion had room to grow. This is suggestive, not conclusive. Outside again, the wind changes. Ash lifts along the avenue in a slow, pale sheet. You see people carrying doors, trunks, blankets, bird cages, account books, and one very determined houseplant that has survived better than several banks. The city is wounded, yes, but also absurdly busy. Men mark ruins with chalk. Crews clear debris. Survivors build cooking fires in open lots. Everyone is already making lists. What survived? What failed? What must be rebuilt? What can be forgotten because there is simply no space left in the mind? And beneath this practical chaos, the imagined folder disappears. Maybe it burns in an office whose name nobody remembers. Maybe it is saved, then soaked, then tossed out weeks later by someone who cannot read the blurred ink. Maybe it never existed at all, and the station story grows from 1,000 smaller confusions. We're not proving anything tonight, we're following clues. The clue here is absence, and absence is tricky. It can mean secrecy, it can mean loss, it can mean nobody thought the thing mattered until much later. You step over a strip of rail half buried in ash and feel the city's future pressing upward. San Francisco will rebuild with astonishing speed. Streets will reopen, transit will return, buildings will rise, new paperwork will replace old paperwork, as paperwork always does, like weeds but with signatures. Yet the older city, the one under the burn marks, will not fully come back. It will remain in fragments in insurance maps, photographs, survivor accounts, engineering scraps, property disputes, and rumours that glow faintly whenever someone says there used to be something under there. What if one missing folder left a whole station half imagined below the ash? That is the quiet thought you carry with you as smoke drifts between the walls. Not a conclusion, not a hidden truth, just a careful possibility, folded like paper, browned at the edges, still warm from the fire. You follow the movement of people before you fully understand the route. That is how cities teach you where their heart is. You look for the crowd, the carts, the shoulders leaning into the same direction, the men with lunch pails, the women gripping bundles, the tired clerks trying to look composed while their collars are grey with ash. They all seem to drift toward the waterfront, toward the ferry slips, toward the place where San Francisco touches the bay, and remembers it is not an island, even though after the quake it may have felt like one. What's broadly accepted is that ferries were essential to San Francisco's daily life in the early 20th century. Long before the great bridges made crossing the bay feel routine, people moved by boat. Ferries carried commuters' goods, news, grief, gossip, and the kind of morning impatience that apparently existed even before smartphones made everyone dramatically worse. Streetcars and cable cars fed passengers toward the waterfront. Market Street functioned as a major spine of movement connecting downtown energy to the ferry building, that tall, confident landmark watching over the edge of the city like it had agreed to supervise everyone's bad decisions. You stand among the crowds and hear the city trying to restart itself. Hooves strike stone, wheels grind, men shout directions. A bell rings somewhere near the ferry slips. The bay water slaps pilings with a tired, regular sound, and above it all, smoke thins into the morning sky. The ferry building, damaged but still standing in the wider memory of the disaster, becomes a symbol of continuity. People keep moving through it because the city has to keep breathing. Even after the streets crack and the fires spread, life insists on schedules. It is rude like that. One interpretation is that later stories of secret corridors and hidden platforms may have grown from the practical complexity around these transit connections. Busy ferry terminals needed storage service rooms, baggage areas, utility spaces, and controlled flows of people and goods. Street railways needed switching power, maintenance, and coordination. Cable systems depended on machinery beneath the surface, with cables moving invisibly below street level. To someone decades later, hearing of underground rooms, access ways, and rail-related infrastructure, the pieces could slide together into something more dramatic. A hidden station, a buried network, a city under the city. Historians still argue whether San Francisco's early transit landscape should be understood mostly as a set of competing practical systems, or as a unified dream that never quite became whole. That distinction matters. Most historians agree that the city did not possess a secret, fully developed underground railway in the way a rumor might imagine. The evidence we do have points instead to a patchwork of ferries, streetcars, cable lines, private companies, public debates, repair yards, sheds, tunnels in limited contexts, and plenty of ambitious proposals. But a careful reading might suggest that patchworks can create their own mysteries. When many systems overlap, the forgotten seams become interesting. You move with the crowd and imagine the ground beneath their feet. A service passage runs below a building, perhaps for storage or maintenance. Another low corridor connects to a basement. A stair leads down behind a locked door. A cable slot hums somewhere under the street. Nothing here needs to be sinister. Nothing needs to glow green, contain secret symbols, or involve a man in a hat saying, "You were not meant to find this." A more cautious explanation could be that the so-called secret corridors were ordinary working spaces misunderstood after time, damage, and retelling. Still, if you are standing in a city of smoke and bells, ordinary spaces can feel haunted by possibility. What if weary commuters once passed unknowingly above a sealed platform? You let that thought settle as a ferry whistle moans across the bay. It is easy to imagine a tired office worker in 1905 stepping off a boat hat low against the wind, hurrying toward a streetcar, never knowing that beneath a nearby floor, a partly finished chamber waits in darkness. Maybe it was only a storage level. Maybe a transit company once considered adapting it. Maybe an engineer sketched improvements that never moved beyond paper. Maybe later, earthquake damage made the whole area unsafe and rebuilding crews sealed what they did not need. That's a possibility, not a certainty. The mystery isn't in what we know, but in what we can't confirm. A fringe idea proposes that old San Francisco held deeper, more connected roots than official records usually describe, sometimes linked in rumor to emergency movement, private industry, or even wealthy interests hoping to move unseen. This theory isn't widely accepted, but it tells you something about the city's personality. San Francisco has always encouraged underground imagination because its visible surface is already dramatic enough to seem like a disguise. Hills fall into fog, streets climb at unreasonable angles, buildings perch above filled land. The shoreline itself changed over time. Honestly, if a city rearranges its own edge, you can forgive people for wondering what else it tucked away. Near the ferry crowds, you pass stacked trunks and crates marked for Oakland, Alameda, Sausalito, and points beyond. Workers move with the exhausted precision of people who cannot afford poetry. Someone yells about a missing invoice. Someone else argues over a shipment of canned goods. A woman scolds a child for standing too close to a wagon wheel, which is fair because history is already dangerous enough without adding wagon-based nonsense. The scene feels ordinary and extraordinary at once. That is disaster's strange trick. It turns daily routines into acts of defiance. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. The documented world is full of ferries, street railways, cable systems, commerce, and post-quake disruption. The interpretation is that underground utility and service spaces may have been remembered as something more organised. The gentle imagination is the platform beneath the flow, the forgotten edge of a route that might have been planned, used briefly, altered, or never completed. If the evidence is thin, we'll say so. We'll keep the solid ground separate from the mist. You step into the shadow of a surviving wall and feel the temperature drop. Down here, near the foot of the city, the air is damp from the bay. You hear Waterbell's footsteps and a low vibration that may be nothing more than wheels over damaged rail. But you imagine it travelling downward through iron and brick into rooms where no passenger stands now. A sign in your mind says not secret station, because that would be too neat, too eager, too much like a tourist attraction with a suspiciously clean gift shop. Instead, it says something duller and more believable: access storage service, proposed connection closed until further notice. Closed until further notice, that phrase lingers. A popular rumour claims that some workers after the quake found sealed or partly collapsed spaces near transit routes and were told to fill them rather than explore them. Again, this is suggestive, not conclusive. Disasters make practical people even more practical. If a void threatens a street, you stabilise it. If a basement is dangerous, you block it. If nobody has time to preserve every odd corner, many odd corners vanish. What if the erased network was not erased by conspiracy, but by urgency? What if the city did not hide the station, so much as forget it, while trying not to fall apart? You watch a ferry pull away loaded with people who carry bundles and expressions too heavy for their faces. The bay opens silver grey beyond the smoke. Behind you, Market Street stretches inland, broken but alive, its rails catching light in uneven flashes. Ahead, the water takes people outward. Beneath perhaps a corridor leads nowhere anyone can now prove. You are not chasing a hidden truth, you are standing inside a puzzle made of movement. The ferries above the cables, below the streetcars, between the burned papers, behind the sealed rooms imagined underfoot. San Francisco keeps moving because it must, and in that motion, some places are remembered clearly, while others blur into rumour. And somewhere under the worn boards, under the ash, under the echo of ferry bells, the idea of a forgotten platform waits quietly, not asking to be believed, only asking why so many cities feel deeper than their maps. You leave the waterfront with the ferry whistle fading behind you, and the sound follows like a thin silver thread through the smoke. Inland, the city becomes less a place and more a workshop that has been rudely shaken while every tool was still in someone's hand. Men measure walls that may not stay upright. Surveyors squint along damaged lines. Labourers pry bricks from piles and stack them for reuse. Horses snort at the smell of hot ash. Somewhere a foreman makes a note on a clipboard, which is perhaps the most optimistic object in all of 1906 San Francisco. Most historians agree that the early 20th century was an age of bold engineering ambition in American cities. Electric streetcars, cable systems, rail terminals, tunnels, bridges, subways, elevated lines and grand civic plans were not fantasies in the abstract. Cities were growing quickly, and transportation was a daily crisis disguised as progress. San Francisco had its own difficult geography to solve: steep hills, crowded corridors, waterfront traffic, unstable ground in some districts and neighborhoods that needed better connections. The evidence we do have points to a city where transit planning was not a side issue. It was tied to money politics, land value, class labor, and the simple desire to arrive somewhere without feeling as if the city itself had personally insulted your calves. You walk beside an engineer's table set up near a damaged building. The table is not grand. It is just boards over sawhorses weighted at the corners with bricks. A map lies across it, its edges curling from damp air. Pencil lines cross streets, curve toward terminals, mark grades, crossings, possible routes and practical headaches. A man in a soot-darkened collar taps one line with his finger and shakes his head. Another man argues that the grade is too steep. A third says something about cost, which immediately ruins the mood, because cost has always been the villain that arrives just when imagination is getting comfortable. One interpretation is that a lost or rumoured station could have begun not as a secret place but as a line on a map, a proposed connection, a planned shelter, a transfer point, a service platform, a future improvement drawn with confidence, revised with annoyance, delayed by budget, then swallowed by disaster. Let me rephrase that more carefully. The existence of ambitious sketches would not mean the network was built. A penciled route is not a tunnel. A proposed station is not a platform full of commuters. But old plans can have afterlives. They can be remembered by one person, misquoted by another, blended with a basement someone actually saw, and eventually become a story about a hidden train station beneath the rebuilt city. Historians still argue whether San Francisco's transit ambitions, before and after 1906, were primarily practical responses to growth or symbolic attempts to prove the city could master its impossible terrain. There's no full consensus, partly because both can be true. Public works often carry two loads at once. They move bodies and they tell a story about power. A tunnel says we can pass through this hill. A rail terminal says people and commerce arrive here. A map says the future will obey our pencil. Then the earth shakes, the paper burns, and the future politely declines the invitation. You lean closer to the map. In the smoky light, a penciled line seems to dip under a street, then reappear near a busy corridor. A more cautious explanation could be that it marks a grade separation, a utility route, a cable alignment, or a proposal that never left the planning stage. Still, what if one penciled line on a map refused to vanish? Not physically, perhaps. The paper may burn, the office may collapse, the engineer may move on, retire, or spend the rest of his life explaining that no one ever listens until everything breaks. But the idea survives in memory. A line becomes a phrase becomes a rumour becomes a place you can almost hear beneath your feet. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. The documented world is one of real transit systems, real engineering challenges, and real rebuilding pressures. The interpretation is that unfinished or proposed infrastructure could later be mistaken for completed underground stations. The imagination is the map before you, its pencil mark dark enough to look stubborn, as if graphite has a personality and possibly a grudge. You walk on. The streets are filled with the practical music of rebuilding. Hammers strike, shovels scrape, wagons creak. The little drip you heard below the broken street earlier seems to return in another form now, as water falling from a cracked pipe into a gutter. Drip, pause, drip. A tiny metronome for a city trying to keep time. The motif stays with you quiet and persistent, like a memory that refuses to become useful. A fringe idea proposes that some early engineers may have designed more extensive underground transit concepts for San Francisco than later public memory preserved. This theory isn't widely accepted when it turns into claims of a completed secret railway, but if we treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion, it becomes softer and more plausible in mood. Maybe there were more proposals, partial works, surveys, basements, alignments, and service spaces than most casual histories discuss. That is not a hidden empire under the street. It is the ordinary clutter of ambitious infrastructure. Honestly, most cities do not need secret societies to become confusing. They have contractors. You pass a group of men examining a damaged cable slot in the street. Cable cars had long depended on underground cable channels, grip mechanisms, pulleys, powerhouses, and maintenance access. To someone unfamiliar with the system, these hidden moving parts could seem almost magical. A vehicle on the surface pulled by a cable below feels like a small Victorian trick. The street itself is doing the work. If you were sleepy, smoky-eyed and dramatic, which you currently are, you might imagine that every slot in the pavement is a hint of deeper passage. But the solid ground remains important. Most historians agree that cable car infrastructure is well documented in broad outline, and it does not require an erased passenger station to explain its underground features. The mystery is not that San Francisco had hidden machinery, it did. The mystery is whether some damaged, forgotten, or proposed rail-related spaces later became wrapped into a bigger legend. What if the story is pointing at something else? What if station is the wrong word for a real but less glamorous place? You pause at the edge of a cleared lot where an architect and a builder argue over the future shape of a block. Their voices are low, tired, and precise. They speak of grades, foundations, walls, loads, access permits, and schedules. No one says mystery, no one says legend. No one says network, they say costs, they say deadlines, they say the street must reopen. In that plain language, you hear the machinery of forgetting. Not malicious forgetting, administrative forgetting. The kind where anything that does not serve the next phase is filed away, paved over, or described so boringly that later readers miss its importance. A careful reading might suggest that the erased station legend survives because it satisfies a feeling modern maps cannot fully answer. People want to believe a city has a secret draft underneath the visible one, a first version, a rejected version, a passage where all the abandoned futures sit quietly together wearing dust. San Francisco, with its burned records and bold rebuilding, gives that feeling unusually fertile ground. You imagine the engineer rolling up his map at dusk. The pencil line disappears inside the paper, hidden but not gone. He tucks it under his arm and walks through streets that smell of ash and bay water. Maybe he means to redraw it. Maybe he knows it will never be built. Maybe he forgets it by the next morning because someone needs him to inspect a wall before it falls on a bakery. History often turns on practical errands, which is rude but realistic. Behind him, the damaged rails glow faintly in the lowering light. Beneath them, real channels, pipes, foundations, and service spaces wait in darkness. Somewhere between the documented machinery and the imagined platform lies the puzzle you keep following. Not proof, not certainty. A penciled possibility, stubborn as graphite, quietly resisting the quake, the fire, and the clean new map that wants to replace everything. You keep the rolled map in your mind as you move toward the places where the city has begun to cover itself again. That is the strange thing about catastrophe. For a little while, everything hidden becomes visible. Foundations lie open, pipes split, cellars gape. Brick vaults lose their roofs and become rooms under the sky. Then the workers arrive and the city starts pulling a blanket over its own exposed bones. Boards go down, rubble is cleared, holes are filled, new walls rise. Streets regain their polite surfaces as if nothing beneath them ever had anything interesting to say. Archaeology suggests that disaster layers can preserve as much as they destroy. Ash collapse, fill, and rebuilding conceal ordinary objects in place, leaving future researchers a compressed record of one violent moment. A broken bottle, a bent rail, a scorched tile, a collapsed wall, a changed foundation line. All of these may become clues. The evidence we do have points to San Francisco as a city that rebuilt quickly, often pragmatically, with enormous pressure to restore commerce, housing, transportation, and confidence. But a quick rebuild also means that not every exposed feature is studied, labelled, and lovingly placed into a museum drawer. Sometimes it is shoveled aside because wagons need the road open by Tuesday. You stand at the edge of a work site where men are filling a depression beside a damaged street. Their shirts are damp, their faces are grey with dust. One man swings a pick into loose brick. Another guides a cart backward while shouting at a horse that appears to have serious doubts about urban recovery. A foreman checks a list and points toward a low opening at the base of a wall. It may be a cellar. It may be a utility access. It may be part of a service space connected to older transit machinery. It may be nothing more romantic than a place where someone once stored coal and regretted the stairs. One interpretation is that the quake became a convenient eraser in later storytelling, not necessarily because officials wanted to hide a station, but because disaster provides such a powerful explanation. Why are the records missing the fire? Why is the entrance gone, the quake? Why does no one remember the details? People had larger problems. A more cautious explanation could be that many pieces of damaged infrastructure were removed, filled, altered, or buried for practical reasons, and the quake later became the shorthand for every missing answer. It is the historical equivalent of blaming traffic, sometimes true, sometimes vague, always available. Historians still argue whether the post-quake rebuilding of San Francisco preserved the old city inside the new one, or replaced it so thoroughly that only fragments remained. Both views may hold pieces of the puzzle. Most historians agree that San Francisco did not start from zero after 1906. Streets, property lines, surviving structures, existing transit corridors, and economic habits all shaped what came next. Yet the fires and reconstruction also created chances to revise, erase, simplify, or cover. A city is not a clean page after disaster. It is more like a page written on burned at the edges, scraped overwritten, and then handed to someone with terrible handwriting. You watch a crew lower beams across an opening. A small drip sounds below, steady as before. Drip, pause, drip. The same little rhythm from the broken street, the same quiet reminder that something under the surface is still awake. The men do not treat it as mysterious. They treat it as annoying. This is how many mysteries probably begin, with professionals being too busy to be impressed. If you stopped them and whispered, "Do you realize this might one day become a legend?" they would likely hand you a shovel, which is fair. What if the city used broken brick and silence as a blanket? That sounds dramatic, so let's soften it carefully. We are not saying the city knowingly buried a secret passenger station. That would be a conclusion the evidence cannot safely carry. Instead, the possibility is quieter. In the rush to rebuild a damaged chamber corridor, stair, partial platform, cable-related access, or unfinished transit feature might have been judged useless, unsafe, or simply inconvenient. It might have been filled, sealed, renamed, or absorbed into a new foundation. Later, with records missing and memories aging, people might describe it as a station. This might support the idea that the erased network is less a hidden system and more a cluster of forgotten spaces stitched together by rumour. A popular rumour claims that certain underground spaces were intentionally covered during rebuilding because they complicated property claims or public safety decisions. This theory isn't widely accepted, but it has a practical flavour. Cities often prefer smooth stories: a stable street, a usable building, a clear title, a finished permit. Nobody wants an inconvenient void under a sidewalk unless it can be rented out, taxed, or turned into parking, because modern civilization has many priorities and most of them involve fees. If we treat the rumour as a possibility rather than a conclusion, it becomes a question about how quickly practical decisions can erase physical memory. You step down carefully into a shallow exposed area beside a wall. The air cools. Not dramatically, not like entering a tomb in an adventure film, but enough that your skin notices. The smell changes from smoke and horse sweat to damp brick and old mineral water. Your hand brushes a rough surface where soot darkens the mortar. There is no sign that says hidden station. There is no ticket window, no timetable, no lost conductor waiting politely since 1906. There is just a space with ambiguous edges, a city layer that might mean several things at once. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. The documented part is the scale of destruction and rebuilding. The interpretation is that destroyed records and buried features can create legends. The imagination is you standing here hearing a rail-like hum through the earth, wondering whether a sealed platform once existed nearby. The mystery isn't in what we know, but in what we can't confirm. To be clear, this is debated, and any strong version of the claim needs more evidence than a mood, a rumour, and one suspicious hole in the ground. Still, mood has power. Above you, the city is already rehearsing its comeback. You hear the scrape of shovels, the clank of chains, the mutter of men arguing over measurements. Someone drops a tool, and the echo rings through the little chamber longer than expected. The sound travels along the wall, then fades into a direction you cannot see. A careful reading might suggest acoustics, nothing more. Brick chambers echo, pipes carry sound, hollow streets play tricks. But what if the echo is what kept the story alive? Not a map, not a document, a sound. A worker hears something beyond a sealed wall. He mentions it in a boarding house. Someone else remembers a stair. Another person recalls an old rail spur. The fragments meet, and the network is born. You climb back up into the dusty light. A wagon passes carrying bricks, each one salvaged from the old city and headed into the new. That feels important. The rebuilt San Francisco does not simply replace the ruined one. It reuses pieces of it. Bricks, stones, foundations, corridors, routes, habits, ambitions. The new city grows from the debris of the old, which means the old never fully leaves. It becomes quieter, lower, harder to name. As evening approaches, smoke softens the horizon. The bay gleams faintly beyond the streets. Somewhere a bell rings. Somewhere water drips under stone. The quake has not erased everything. It has changed the way everything can be remembered. And beneath the repaired surface, whether as real chamber, lost proposal filled void, or gentle, what if the hidden station becomes less like a destination and more like a question sealed under brick? The light thins into that strange amber hour when a damaged city looks almost gentle as long as you do not look too closely. Smoke catches the sunset and turns the air bronze. Windowless walls glow for a moment, pretending to be ruins from some ancient empire, rather than the backside of a hardware store that had a very bad week. You move through the rebuilt-in-progress streets, with the rolled map still in your mind, the missing folder behind you, the ferry bell fading somewhere near the bay, and that patient little drip returning whenever the city grows quiet enough to hear itself. The evidence we do have points to rebuilding crews working under immense pressure after the quake and fires. Roads needed clearing, buildings needed inspection, water, gas power, transit food delivery, communication and shelter all had to be restored in some workable order. Most historians agree that this was not a slow romantic archaeological dig. It was emergency urban repair on a massive scale. People were tired, underpaid, overworked, grieving and trying to put a city back together before commerce, disease, weather and politics made everything worse. In those conditions, a strange basement or a damaged passage would likely be judged first by practical questions. Is it safe? Does it block rebuilding? Can it be reused? Should it be filled? Who is paying for lunch? You pass a line of workers carrying lanterns down into a partially exposed lower level near a damaged block. The glow slides along brick like warm water. For a moment, you see their shadows move behind a broken wall stretched long and thin, almost like figures crossing the windows of a train at night. A more cautious explanation could be very simple. They are inspecting foundations, drains, utility spaces, or cable-related infrastructure. San Francisco's working city had many hidden parts that were never meant to impress passengers. The city below the street was not necessarily secret. It was functional. It held the less glamorous organs of urban life, which is a polite way of saying pipes, cables, storage, and things you hope never become your problem. Still, what if lantern glow once moved behind walls where no one expected workers? That question is not evidence, of course. It is atmosphere. We're not proving anything tonight. We're following clues. One interpretation is that unusual reports from workers, property owners, or later storytellers may have been shaped by the sight of men entering low openings at dusk, carrying lamps into spaces that looked more mysterious from a distance than they were up close. A lantern in a basement becomes a hidden crew. A hidden crew becomes a sealed passage. A sealed passage becomes a network. Give that story 50 years and a few dramatic pauses, and suddenly someone's uncle remembers a train platform under the block, complete with benches, tiles, and probably a ghost who checks tickets. Historians still argue whether post-disaster rumours should be treated mainly as distorted memories or as clues to overlooked physical realities. Both approaches have value if handled carefully. Rumours are not records, but they are not meaningless either. They can preserve anxiety, local knowledge, misunderstood observations, or fragments of real places described with the wrong vocabulary. A popular rumour claims that rebuilding crews found odd chambers beneath parts of the city and were discouraged from talking about them. This theory isn't widely accepted, especially when it grows into claims of an elaborate buried railway, but if the evidence is thin, we'll say so. If we treat it as a possibility rather than a conclusion. It can still ask a useful question. What kinds of underground spaces did ordinary people see, misunderstand, and retell? You walk nearer to the lanterns. The men below are not whispering. They are arguing about timber. This slightly damages the romance of the moment, but it improves the history. Their voices rise through the opening practical and irritated. One says a support is rotten. Another says it will hold until morning. A third says if it holds until morning, it will be someone else's problem, which may be the unofficial motto of infrastructure everywhere. You hear boots on boards, metal against stone, and the scrape of a shovel striking something hard. Then the sound changes. A hollow knock travels through the ground deeper than the shovel strike itself. It echoes not loudly, but with that rounded tone that suggests space behind a wall or beneath a floor. The workers pause, so do you. In a more dramatic story, this would be the moment the wall opens to reveal a grand platform lit by impossible blue light. In a safer, sleepier, more historically cautious story, it might be a cistern, a cellar extension, a void left by settling a drainage channel, or a buried service corridor. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. We'll keep the solid ground separate from the mist. A fringe idea proposes that certain basement reports from old San Francisco hint at deeper roots associated with lost transit planning. This is not widely accepted as a conclusion, but it remains interesting as a cultural pattern. The city's visible history already contains enough hidden movement to feed the imagination cable systems, moving beneath streets, ferries, linking neighborhoods across water tunnels, cut through difficult ground in later periods, and basements sunk into hillsides and filled land. A careful reading might suggest that people did not invent the underground mood from nothing. They lived above real hidden mechanisms. They simply may have stretched those mechanisms into a larger story. You picture a worker lowering his lantern through a gap in the wall. The flame leans disturbed by a cool draft. Below, perhaps, is a narrow chamber with damp brick and a rusted iron bracket. Perhaps the floor slopes. Perhaps there is a rail-like strip of metal that once supported machinery, not passengers. Perhaps there are marks where boards had been fixed in place. It could be entirely ordinary. It could be part of a forgotten storage level. It could be an access route never meant for public use. Or in the soft, what-if imagination of tonight, it could be the edge of a platform that was planned, started, abandoned, damaged, sealed, and slowly converted by memory into something larger than itself. That's a possibility, not a certainty. Above ground, a streetcar bell rings in the distance, a small bright sound amid the heavier work. Surface transit returning after disaster would have mattered enormously to everyday life. People needed routes to jobs, ferry connections, temporary housing shops, relief stations, and relatives. The documented history of urban recovery is full of such practical urgency. A city does not rebuild only with bricks, it rebuilds with roots. If you can move through it again, you can begin to believe it still exists. Yet motion also hides things. A reopened street smooths over the awkward places. A rebuilt curb makes yesterday's gap disappear. A new wall covers old brick. A fresh schedule replaces the memory of disruption. And the workers with lanterns finish their inspection, climb out, and say whatever they saw below is not worth discussing unless it affects the next day's labour. This is suggestive, not conclusive, but it feels quietly important. Many possible mysteries die not because they are solved, but because no one has time to be fascinated. You stand near the opening until the last lantern comes up. The men leave muddy footprints on the boards. One wipes his hands on his trousers. Another spits into the dust and says the lower wall should be filled before it slumps. No one calls it a station. No one calls it a network. The words belong to later imagination, to people looking back through smoke loss and a century of urban legends. But the space below remains there for a moment longer, breathing cool air through broken brick. The mystery isn't in what we know, but in what we can't confirm. There may have been nothing more than a basement and a draft. There may have been an access passage tied to forgotten infrastructure. There may have been a proposed transit chamber never finished. What if the story is pointing at something else, not a secret railway, but the way cities conceal their own working parts until disaster briefly lifts the cover? Night settles gently. The lantern glow shrinks, then disappears. Under the street, the drip continues. Drip, pause, drip. It is not proof of anything. It is only water finding the lowest place, as water always does, patient and unimpressed. Still in the dark, it sounds almost like a signal from the city below, tapping softly against stone, asking you to keep listening. You follow the sound of the drip until it becomes less a sound than a habit. Drip, pause, drip. It keeps time beneath the city's surface while the people above hurry through their own louder clocks. Hammers begin before dawn. Wagons groan at midday. Bells mark arrivals and departures. At night, the damaged streets settle with soft cracks and sighs, as though San Francisco is speaking in its sleep. You are no longer sure whether you are chasing a station, a memory, or the way a city teaches its survivors to turn loss into story. Most historians agree that cities turn trauma into stories, not because people are foolish and not because memory is useless, but because raw catastrophe is too large to hold without shape. A date becomes a marker, a ruined block becomes a lesson. A strange sound under the street becomes a tale told at dinner. A missing record becomes a possibility. What's broadly accepted is that the 1906 disaster became one of San Francisco's defining civic memories, retold through photographs, survivor accounts, engineering reports, rebuilding narratives, family legends, and public anniversaries. The city did not merely rebuild walls, it rebuilt meaning. You walk through a temporary camp where families sit around small cooking fires, blankets hang from ropes, coffee boils in dented pots. Someone has propped a framed photograph against a crate, as if the old parlour can be rebuilt around it by sheer stubbornness. A little girl turns a cracked teacup in her hands, too young to understand insurance claims, but old enough to understand that adults are pretending very hard. Near the edge of the camp, an older man tells a story about a passage under a street near the ferry route. He says workers found it. He says it ran farther than anyone expected. He says men with authority ordered it sealed. His listeners lean closer. A careful reading might suggest that the erased station became a vessel for grief and ambition. That does not mean the story is false in every detail. It means the story may carry more than one kind of truth. It might preserve a fragment of a real underground space, perhaps a utility chamber basement corridor, cable-related structure, or abandoned plan. It might also express the feeling that the city had hidden parts, lost chances, and futures interrupted by the quake. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. If the evidence is thin, we'll say so. And here the evidence for a grand erased network is thin, while the evidence for a city full of underground fragments, damaged records, and retold memories is much stronger. Historians still argue whether urban legends should be treated as obstacles to truth or as clues to how communities remember what official records leave out. That phrase matters because the hidden station story does something official plans often cannot. It gives shape to absence. It lets people picture what was lost below the visible rebuild. It turns missing paperwork, sealed voids, and half-remembered engineering talk into an image you can stand inside. A platform, a rail, a corridor, a lantern moving away. The image may be partly imagined, but imagination is not always random. Sometimes it grows around the outline of something real. A popular rumor claims that old families in certain neighborhoods pass down stories of workers entering spaces beneath the city and finding rail-like remains or forgotten platforms. This theory isn't widely accepted as evidence of a hidden passenger station, but it does fit a familiar pattern. Family stories often preserve atmosphere better than measurements. They remember that grandfather saw a dark stare, that an uncle heard hollow ground near a rebuilt block, that someone's boarding house neighbour worked on a crew and mentioned a sealed place. By the third retelling, the stair has tiles. By the fifth, it has a timetable. By the 10th, someone has added a ticket booth because apparently oral tradition also enjoys interior decorating. You sit near the campfire and listen as the older man continues. His hands move as he speaks, sketching invisible streets in the smoky air. He does not sound like a liar. He sounds like someone trying to make sense of fragments. He remembers a wall opened by accident. He remembers a cold draft. He remembers men told to fill it before the street reopened. He remembers, or thinks he remembers, a strip of iron set into the ground. A more cautious explanation could be that he is describing a cellar, a service rail for moving supplies, a cable system component, or construction debris. Let me rephrase that more carefully. His memory might support the idea of an unusual underground feature, not necessarily a secret train station. Still, the listeners want the station. You can feel it in the way they lean forward. They want a hidden place below the ruined one, a city that survived in secret even when the surface burned. That desire is deeply human. If your house is gone, perhaps something beneath it remains. If your street is ash, perhaps the older street is only sleeping. If records burned, perhaps memory can build a replacement. What if San Francisco remembered its underground through rumor instead of stone? The mystery isn't in what we know, but in what we can't confirm. You rise and continue through the camp, past blankets and crates and sleeping children. The city's public memory is already beginning to choose its symbols. The quake, the fire, the heroic rebuild, the endurance, the speed. The phoenix-like return, because cities adore bird metaphors almost as much as officials adore speeches. Those stories are not wrong. They are necessary, but quieter stories survive underneath them. The missing folder, the penciled line, the sealed opening, the lantern glow, the drip. Each one is too small to become official history alone, but together they form a soft, underground mythology. One interpretation is that the network they erased may not have been a network of tracks at all. It may have been a network of memories, workers, commuters, engineers, ferry passengers, clerks, property owners and children who all saw one piece of the city's underside and later passed it along. A utility corridor here, a cable channel there, a basement near the ferry route, a proposed rail connection on a burned map, a chamber filled after the quake. None of these pieces needs to be false for the grand version to be exaggerated, and none of the exaggeration erases the emotional truth that San Francisco was built in layers, and that some layers were lost before they could be fully named. A fringe idea proposes that the hidden station was deliberately erased to protect powerful financial or political interest during rebuilding. This theory isn't widely accepted, and it should be handled gently. Cities do have politics. Transit decisions can involve land value, private companies, public pressure and quiet deals. But jumping from that reality to a fully suppressed underground railway asks for evidence we do not have. A safer reading might suggest something less theatrical and more plausible. After the quake, the needs of rebuilding property, safety and modernization shaped what was preserved, what was forgotten, and what later became rumor. You pass a bricklayer sleeping with his head against a sack of lime. His mouth is open. His hat has fallen over one eye. He looks like a man who would not appreciate being assigned to an urban legend. Nearby, someone snores with impressive commitment. Even mystery has to respect exhaustion. The city is not filled with conspirators in shadowed rooms. It is filled with tired people who need wages, soup, shelter, and a street that does not collapse under a wagon. And yet under the ordinary need, the story keeps breathing. At the edge of the camp, you look back toward Market Street. In the distance, rails flash faintly under moonlight. Not hidden rails, visible ones, practical ones, documented ones. But your mind now hears the echo below them, the possible second route, the imagined platform, the sealed service space, the lost plan that might have become something else in a different version of the city. We're not proving anything tonight, we're following clues. And sometimes the clue is not a thing you can touch. Sometimes it is the way a rumor refuses to die because it explains a feeling better than the official version does. The campfire smoke drifts upward and joins the larger haze. Above, the city rebuilds itself into history. Below, in rumor, it keeps its half-lit corridors. You walk back toward the place where the pavement once opened, though. By now it may already be covered, fenced, filled, or simply made ordinary again. That is how the city keeps slipping away from you. Every time you think you have found the edge of the hidden station, someone arrives with boards, bricks, paperwork, or a practical explanation. A stair becomes a cellar. A corridor becomes storage. A rail becomes a support strip. A map line becomes a proposal. And yet the feeling remains low and steady, like the little drip beneath the street. Drip, pause, drip. What's broadly accepted is that San Francisco kept reinventing itself after 1906. The disaster did not end the city's ambition. If anything, it sharpened it. Streets were cleared, businesses reopened, transit returned, buildings rose, and civic leaders worked to present San Francisco as resilient, modern, and ready for the future. Most historians agree that the city's recovery was not simple, not equal for everyone, and not free of conflict, but it became central to how San Francisco understood itself. The evidence we do have points to a place that rebuilt quickly while carrying scars beneath the surface, some visible, some archived, some buried in the habits of streets. You stand in the blue-grey edge before dawn when the city feels almost weightless. The smoke has thinned. The bay air is cool. Somewhere near the waterfront, a ferry bell rings again, softer now, less like alarm and more like a reminder. Market Street stretches ahead, damaged but not silent. The rails shine faintly. Wagons move in the distance. A man with a broom pushes ash into the gutter, as if sweeping up the end of the world is just another chore, which in fairness, someone always has to do. One interpretation is that the hidden station story reveals how memory fills gaps. A careful reading might suggest that the legend is not best understood as a single lost place waiting to be found intact, but as a cluster of fragments, real transit ambition, real underground machinery, real destroyed records, real post-quake rebuilding, and real human fascination with what cities hide. Some parts are documented, some are interpretation, and some are gentle imagination. If the evidence is thin, we'll say so. The evidence for a fully erased underground network remains thin. The evidence for a layered city full of lost plans and ambiguous spaces is much stronger. Historians still argue whether the hidden places in a city matter most as physical sites or as stories people tell when the official map feels incomplete. You think about that as you look down at the repaired street. A platform may be stone brick, tile, iron and wood. But a platform may also be a waiting place in the imagination, a place where possible histories stand quietly together. The station beneath San Francisco might have been a chamber, a plan, a rumor, a service route, a sealed void, or some mixture that no surviving document can sort cleanly. That's a possibility, not a certainty. To be clear, this is debated. A fringe idea proposes that the lost station was part of a deliberately erased network hidden by powerful interests after the quake. This theory isn't widely accepted, but it continues to attract attention because it turns confusion into drama. A more cautious explanation could be that the quake and fires created perfect conditions for ordinary erasure records, gone structures, damaged entrances, filled memories scattered, and later storytellers connecting pieces that may never have belonged to one system. That may sound less cinematic, but honestly, bureaucracy plus disaster can erase more than any secret society, and it does not even need a cool robe. You imagine one last descent, not as proof, but as a gentle what if. A stair drops below the rebuilt sidewalk. The air cools. The city noise becomes muffled. The brick walls are damp. A rusted bracket marks the side of a corridor. A rail-like strip runs along the floor, perhaps for equipment, perhaps for storage, perhaps once mistaken for something grander. There is no hidden truth waiting at the end, no perfect answer wrapped in dust. There is only the soft outline of a place that might support an idea San Francisco has always been deeper than it looks. The mystery isn't in what we know, but in what we can't confirm. We're not proving anything tonight, we're following clues. The buried tracks under Market Street, the burned paperwork, the ferry crowds, the penciled lines, the brick blanket, the lanterns, the campfire rumors, all of them lead here, not to certainty, but to a calmer kind of curiosity. What if the final platform is less a place than a soft echo beneath your feet? And now the city begins to fade into its quieter shape. The ash settles, the tools rest, the wagons slow. The ferry bell drifts once more across the bay, thinner each time it reaches you, as if distance is gently sanding its edges smooth. You no longer need to decide whether the station was real in the sharp official sense. You can let the documented ground remain firm, let the interpretations stay careful, and let the imagined platform glow softly in the dark below the street. The city breathes above it. A rebuilt wall catches the first pale light. A broom whispers over stone. Somewhere water finds a crack and falls into the unseen. Drip, pause, drip. Not a warning, not a message, just the patient sound of a city settling into itself. You step away from the opening that may have been there, or may only have formed inside the story, and the pavement feels cool through the soles of your shoes. Beneath it may be brick pipe cable, forgotten fill old foundations, or nothing especially mysterious at all. But even ordinary ground can hold memory. Even a sealed cellar can become a dream when enough time passes over it. So you let San Francisco sleep. You let the smoke lift from the roofs. You let the ferry lights blur on the bay. You let the rails lose their shine as morning grows softer, slower, kinder. The hidden station, whether chamber, rumour plan or echo, no longer needs to be solved tonight. It can remain below the surface where gentle mysteries belong, resting under rebuilt streets and quiet footsteps. And as the city settles, you settle too. Your breathing slows with the old drip beneath the stone. Your thoughts loosen their grip on maps, tunnels, records, and unanswered questions. The platform grows dimmer, the lanterns move farther away, the crowd becomes a murmur, the bell becomes a hum, the hum becomes silence. Nothing is chasing you here, nothing waits with urgency. There is only a city after disaster finding its shape again, and you standing softly at the edge of sleep, knowing that some questions can remain open without becoming frightening. The bay air cools, the last ash falls, the street is still. Sweet dreams.